I'm going to describe how to create a basic pivot table in Excel using a set of 900 records of license plate data. So to begin with, we'll talk about what's included in this license plate data. The first column is an inventory number used to catalog the license plates. There are 6 different types of license plate included in this study. Included a license plate that has red ink on it, that has blue ink, and some specialty license plates. The license plates in the study included both standard syntax that are in the form of ABC and then 4 numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and also personalized syntax. Those are the breakdowns there. There's also reflectivity data, so how reflective is the surface of the license plate. Another important variable or data is the contrast, and this is looking at the contrast between the background color of the license plate and the character color. And so a higher contrast creates a license plate that is easier to read, and a lower contrast being very little difference between the background and the characters is more difficult to read. There's also 2 finish types, either flat printed license plate or embossed, and embossed is the kind of stamping into the license plate. And then we also have data related to the production year of the license plate. And we'll see some of the power in the pivot tables to quickly summarize and give us some of the descriptive statistics of the data. So to create a pivot table, we're going to go to Insert, and then we'll click on Pivot Table. We'll select the range where our data is contained. Typically, Excel is smart enough to select the range where the data currently exists, and it happens to be column A through G in this file and rows 1 through 903. You can alternatively just select the columns you're looking at, or directly select all the cells that contain the data you want to look at. Typically, I would recommend inserting the pivot table into a new worksheet and then press OK. And then we have our pivot table. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the different options for analyzing or looking at some of the descriptive statistics of the data. So one of the things we might take a look at is the plate type. So again, there are the 6 plate types, and we want to look at the reflectivity values for each of those plate types. And what's going to happen typically is when we just click on one of the fields to add to our pivot table, it's going to add it in a row, and we can drag that into the values column. So we want to see the reflectivity as a value. Alternatively, so if we uncheck the reflectivity, any of the fields can be dragged down to any of the 4 boxes at the bottom, and I'll talk through each of those in a little more detail as we move forward. So currently, in the default for a value in our pivot table is to do a count, but what we might say is, well, we want to know what the average reflectivity for each of these license plates. So we can go to, again, let's click the drop down bar in the values, go to value field settings, and change the count to an average. And so this will give us the average of reflectivity. And just like in the regular part of Excel, we can format the numbers, so we can remove decimal places if we're showing too much detail that is unnecessary. So those are our average reflectivity. We can do the same thing with contrast. So again, drag contrast down to the values, change the count to an average. And I think I need to format the contrast as a number in my original data sheet, so I'm going to take that off for now. So everything that's in your original data sheet will need to make sure it's formatted as a number in order to do the pivot table averages and sums. Now, taking a closer look at some of the other value field settings, you can look at counts, max and minimum values, standard deviation, variance, and so on. We might also want to break down the plate type by something else. So maybe we want to look at plate type and finish type, and we might want to look at finish type in a column. So this column will tell us the average values of reflectivity for a blue ink license plate that's embossed or flat printed, and flat printed, as well as the grand total. We could also see that in terms of a row, so it can give us the same breakdown in a row. So if you prefer to look at it in a row breakdown, you can place that finish type in the row. One thing we might also be interested in is only looking at newer data, or newer license plates. We could put the production year as a filter. So again, I just selected production year and took it down to a filter. And so let's take a look at all the data that's included. Let's say we want to select multiple items. So we'll turn everything off to begin with and say that we only want the most recent 5 years of data. So 2007 through 2011. And that's going to automatically be reflected in our pivot table. So that was kind of a brief overview of filters, columns, rows, and the values. So those are the 4 fields that we can have in our pivot table. Another thing that we might be interested in doing is creating a pivot chart based on our pivot table. And so it's just a nice way to automatically and quickly have that information calculated. So we might adjust the table a little bit to see everything better, but we'll see that we have the row label breakdowns for the plate type as well as the finish type for reflectivity. So that's how we can quickly create a pivot chart. If we wanted to go back and change any of our original data, we would need to go to our pivot table, and on the Analyze portion we can push refresh to refresh that data if we had made some changes. If we go back and want to add a column in our data, but we want to keep our existing pivot table and just add to it, you can change the data source and then go back to your original file and then choose a larger set of data. Another thing we might be interested in doing is changing the way subtotals or grand totals are presented. So under Pivot Table Tools, under the Design tab, we can go and change our subtotals or grand totals. And those are some of the things that you can just adjust and play around with to fit the needs that you might have. And again, it's helpful just to have a data set to play with and adjust the various tools that are within pivot tables. And thank you for listening to this, and I hope this is helpful for you.